The roast chicken was still warm when Thomas spoke. "We've decided," he said, folding his napkin neatly, as if this were any other dinner. "You have 72 hours to move out. This house is ours now." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard him. My fork hovered mid-air, a slice of carrot sliding off its edge. I looked from my son's face to Lena's, who found sudden fascination in her glass of water. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap. Thomas kept going, his tone rehearsed. "We already signed the deed. It was finalized 2 weeks ago." I reached for my napkin, dabbed the corners of my mouth, and set it beside my untouched bread. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't rise. "I see," I said. I didn't ask how they had done it. I didn't ask who had helped them sign anything while I was in the hospital. I didn't ask where they thought I would go. Instead, I stood, carried my plate to the sink, rinsed it quietly, and walked to my room. The door clicked softly shut behind me, muffling the faint sound of silverware and a giggle I hadn't heard in years. In the mirror, my reflection looked calm, too calm. Same cardigan, same faint sunspots on my cheeks, and yet everything had shifted. I opened the drawer where I kept my old planner. The pages smelled faintly of ink and dust. I flipped to this week's date and wrote one word under Friday: gone. Then I reached up to the top shelf and pulled down the storage box labeled house papers. It thudded onto the bedspread, heavier than I remembered. I hadn't opened it in years, but something told me it was time. Through the vent came the low hum of their voices, something about new curtains, about turning my room into a nursery. I sat cross-legged and began to sift through old receipts, permits, yellowed forms, and then an envelope .trust, final copy. My hand paused. I hadn't seen it since Daniel died. After Daniel passed, silence filled the house. Not heavy, not soft, just sharp, the kind that sliced through rooms and made breathing feel like trespassing. I remember standing at the kitchen sink the morning after the funeral, staring at the stack of unwashed dishes. The phone had rung constantly that week, banks, insurance, people who didn't care that the man who built this house by hand was gone. We were 3 months behind on the mortgage. Daniel had taken out a small loan for repairs the year before. I hadn't even known. I pawned my wedding band that afternoon. The man behind the counter looked more nervous than I did. The money paid off the loan, then came the roof, then the furnace. I picked up tutoring jobs, teenagers struggling with algebra, adults studying for GEDs. I smiled even when I didn't feel it. Every piece of furniture in this house, every fixture I earned it, bit by bit, sale by sale, paycheck by paycheck. When Thomas lost his job 5 years ago, I told him to come home. We'd figure it out. He was 26, raw with disappointment. I cleared out the sewing room to make space for him and Lena when she joined him a year later. They thanked me that first year. I remember how good that felt. But gratitude fades faster than paint. The changes began small. Lena started calling the dining room the project room. Thomas stopped thanking me for dinner. Then the thermostat dipped lower than I liked. "To save energy," Lena said. I bought a small space heater for my room. One afternoon, I found a receipt for a bathroom renovation, $300, from an account I hadn't approved. My gardening tools disappeared from the mudroom. My storage bins were relabeled. My containers in the fridge shoved to the back. It wasn't cruelty. It was erasure. A slow one. I told myself this was family, that love meant yielding, that if I gave enough of myself, they might see me again. Then one evening, while folding laundry in the hall, I heard Lena's voice through their cracked door. "She's not going to be around much longer," she said softly, "and he needs his own space." Her tone wasn't cruel, it was certain. I stood there, towel half folded, feeling something cold settle in my chest. That night, I opened the envelope marked Trust. The pages crackled softly as I unfolded them. I scanned them once, then again slower. The signature on the last page stopped me. My name, Eleanor Hayes. Only it wasn't mine. The R looped differently. The E was too tight. The handwriting looked careful, practiced, but wrong. The notary stamp was from a town 2 counties away, a place I hadn't visited in years. And the date, exactly 2 weeks ago. The same week I'd been under anesthesia having a cyst removed. Someone had signed my name while I lay in a hospital bed, trusting them to feed my cat and water my plants. I sat there until dawn, tracing my false signature with my fingertip. When the first light touched the kitchen window, I began to flip through the trust again, page by page, until I found what I'd half remembered. No transfer or conveyance shall be valid without the explicit written approval of both trust holders or of the surviving spouse. My name was the only one remaining. I had not approved anything. The forged deed meant nothing. The house was still mine. By sunrise, I knew what to do. I powered on my old laptop and called Douglas Price Daniels' lawyer. I hadn't spoken to him since the estate was settled 12 years ago. He answered on the second ring. "Price here." "Douglas, it's Eleanor Hayes." A pause, then a low chuckle. "Eleanor, I'll be damned. You still in the house on Linden?" "I am," I said, "but there's been an issue with the trust." He listened without interruption as I explained. The forged signature, the deed transfer, the notary from 2 counties away. When I finished, he said, "You still have the original?" "Yes." "Then you're not going anywhere," he said firmly. "I'll draft a motion to void the transfer. File it with the county clerk tomorrow. That forged document is evidence. Keep it safe. And Eleanor, if they try to remove you, call the sheriff. You have legal standing. They don't." His voice steadied me like a hand on the shoulder. After hanging up, I made one more call. "Lockworks Residential," came the voice. "I need a rekeying," I said, "today if possible." The locksmith arrived within the hour. By the time he left, every lock in the house was changed. The next morning, as I trimmed the dead leaves from the fern by the window, the front doorknob rattled, then knocking. "Mom," Thomas called, "why'd you change the locks?" I opened only the screen door. He stood there with a canvas bag over his shoulder, eyes tight. "Because," I said evenly, "this house is still mine." He laughed once, sharp. "We signed the deed, Mom. It's done. You had your time here." I picked up the envelope I'd prepared and handed it to him through the screen. "You'll want to read that before saying anything else." He took it reluctantly, the paper heavier than it looked. I closed the door and watched through the side window as he walked back to his car, opened the envelope, and began to read. His brow furrowed. His hand went to his forehead. He didn't come back to the door. By that afternoon, the county clerk had confirmed receipt of my motion. The forged transfer was legally void. Douglas called later that day. He'd filed a fraud complaint and attached the notary record. "They'll try to stall," he said, "but the law's on your side." That night, Lena left a voicemail. "You didn't have to make this a legal thing," she said, her voice brittle. "You could have just left quietly." I didn't call back. Instead, I baked. Banana bread, 2 loaves. The smell filled the house like memory. The next day, the bank sent an alert, an unsuccessful attempt to withdraw funds from the renovation account. I checked the records. Everything was still frozen, still mine. It struck me then. They hadn't taken anything except for granted that I wouldn't fight. 2 days later, the sound of packing filled the house. They didn't slam doors. They didn't shout. Just the dull rhythm of boxes shifting, the scrape of furniture, the sigh of endings. When the last of their things were gone, the silence left behind was not sadness. It was space. I walked through each room, the living room with its sun-bleached rug, the kitchen that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, the master bedroom I hadn't slept in since Daniel died. I set my clothes back in my old dresser, plugged in my reading lamp. When I turned it on, the light felt warmer than I remembered. That night, I sat on the porch swing Daniel had built from cedar planks 30 years ago. The wood creaked under me. The air smelled faintly of rain and lilac. For the first time in months, I felt steady. 3 months passed quietly. I painted the kitchen walls sage green over 2 weekends. The strokes were uneven, but I didn't mind. I liked the imperfections. I began volunteering at the library twice a week, shelving books, reading to children during story hour. Wyatt, the neighbor's teenage boy, started mowing my lawn. When I offered to pay, he said, "My dad says you held this block together when everyone else left." I slipped him a 20 anyway. The next week, he brought me a peach pie. Life became small again, but whole. Then one afternoon, Douglas called. "It's finalized," he said. "The trust is now fully in your name." I thanked him quietly. He hesitated. "Thomas ever reach out?" "Not yet," I said. But that evening, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, Thomas stood on the porch. He looked older than I remembered. The lines around his mouth had deepened. The confidence I used to envy had thinned into something more fragile. He held a box in his arms, small, cardboard, worn. "Hi, Mom," he said. "Hi. I wanted to return this." He held out the box. Inside were things I hadn't seen in years, family photographs, Daniel's old pocket watch, the cross-stitch pillow from our first house. I stepped aside and motioned him in. He sat at the kitchen table staring at his hands. "I was stupid," he said finally. "Lena said we'd be doing you a favor, that you'd be happier somewhere smaller, easier. I didn't think—" His voice trailed off. "I didn't think you'd see it as a theft," I finished gently. He nodded. I looked at him for a long moment. He was still my son, still the boy who'd fallen asleep on Daniel's shoulders during fireworks, who'd called home from college crying over a failed exam. "You wanted to start a life," I said softly. "That's not wrong, but you tried to build it on something that wasn't yours to take." He swallowed hard. "I know. I can't fix what I did, but I can apologize." I nodded. "Then start there." For the first time in months, we both laughed, a short, uncertain laugh, but real. He stayed for tea. We talked about small things, the new grocery store, the neighbor's dog, how the apple tree out back still refused to die. When he left, he hugged me awkwardly, like he wasn't sure he still had permission. "You don't have to forgive me now," he murmured. "I already did," I said, "but trust takes longer." A year later, the house on Linden Street looks almost the same except brighter. The porch swing has been sanded and repainted a pale blue. The kitchen smells of rosemary and paint. There's a photo on the counter. Me, Thomas, and his little girl, Emma, sitting together at the farmer's market last Sunday. Lena didn't come, but she sent a polite card last Christmas. That's enough for now. Sometimes Thomas stops by with Emma to fix the gutters or mow the lawn. He doesn't stay long, but he stays long enough. And every time he leaves, he says the same thing before pulling out of the driveway. "You're coming over next week, right?" And every time I nod, because we both learned something about foundations, not the kind made of wood or nails, but the kind built from apologies, from patience, from something solid enough to stand on again. At night, when the house quiets, I make tea and sit by the window. The lights on Linden Street shimmer faintly against the dark. The house no longer feels like something to defend. It feels like something to live in. Everything here, the walls, the worn floorboards, the laughter starting to return, has been earned. And for the first time in a long time, it feels like home again.